Hey, you know who it is. It's Zeus Cruz of Olympian Multimedia, and we are offering you another great segment episode of Views from the Literary Verse, where we're going to be talking everything literature, everything writing, everything books. As you can see, we're in our virtual studio today, and I have two guests, two special guests, two people that I am huge fans of, and it's always an honor and privilege to have the opportunity to speak with them. They're both like octopuses. They got their hands all over the place. It's hard to keep up with them. They're doing so many different things, but it's beautiful to see, and it's always great to talk to. So let's introduce our first guest. Big fan of her work. Both of my guests, as a reminder, is I had the privilege of meeting them at a recent Woodbridge book event. So I'm so glad that I was able to make it. So I was able to meet these two great individuals. Our first guest, she's a proud author of Brooks Promise. I might have the order out of whack. Sorry about that.
You're good so far.
And then we have the other one. It's called In Good Conscience. These books are great because they're so unique, because she offers her medical background or expertise, and she transitions it into this great novel, very insightful, very impactful. Definitely for you readers out there, you can resonate with. It definitely brings a lot of insight too from the medical field. Certain things I wasn't aware of, she was able to explain it in her book in such a beautiful way that it was understandable. So please welcome to the show, Miss Janice Berliner. Janice, how are we doing today?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing fantastic. Couldn't be better. I don't have the kids around. Oh, never mind. I didn't mean to say that out loud. I love you. I love them. Any event, it's appreciative that you're on the show. Like I just mentioned, you're
Having me.
always busy.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the fact that you taking some time out to be on the show
Well,
and
thanks
talk
for
with
having
me.
me.
Definitely. It's always a treat. And that leads to our next guest. Big fan of his work as well. I think I mentioned it before in in the previous video that I did with him when I interviewed him. This reminds me of so much of a book series that's really close to my heart. It's called The Lord of the Rings. You might have heard of that before. Definitely recommend it. But these books are just fantastic and incredible. They're part of the Drowned Realm series. And as we got it on the screen, this is the first one, Rise of the Red Harbinger. Get a good look at that. And then we got the second one, very colorful, The Ghost of Asher. It's just nice blending of fantasy with world building elements, action, adventure, great dialogue. Um, Everything that you can ask for if you're a fan of fantasy, you're definitely going to find it in this book. So please welcome to the show, Mr. Khalid Uddin.
Great, thanks for having me.
How we
It's
doing
a
today,
pleasure.
Khalid?
I'm really excited to be on today. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Again, another treat for you to be here. It's just for me, it's a treat because I'm such a fan of both of you guys' work. So it definitely is inspiring. Especially, I'm trying to get into the realm where you guys are at. You guys write these incredible novels, incredible stories. I'm making my way there, little
That's
by
how it
little.
goes.
I'm going to get there. Just bear with me, guys. But to remind you viewers out there that objective and purpose for this video series is to encourage writers to expand their horizons when it comes to techniques and elements of their writing process by furthering their perspectives on the craft. So this is definitely to encourage you guys, even those who have published their books, have put out some works, their writing out there. Hopefully you could take a little bit from these two authors. They definitely have a lot of insight to provide. And also, too, we're also here to do this. We're here to inspire, right? Inspire to read also as well. I'm going to push as hard as I can, especially with these two authors. I mean, you got to do yourself a favor and get these authors' books. You're not going to be disappointed. But yeah. We're going to be talking about that later. We're going to pitch their books later. We're going to get to that. Don't worry about it. So If you have seen the episodes before, you pretty much know the segment will be conducted through some topics that I call vantage points, which are, I feel, 5 important elements when it comes to writing and how, if you decide later on you want to make a career out of writing, or you definitely want to advance when it comes to your writing. So we're going to start with the first vantage point, which is concept, world building, and character development. So to me, these are like the essential components, the basic components when it comes to writing. Obviously, you got to have a concept in play, something that can resonate with the readers. You're going to incorporate different elements for sure. Obviously, that will lead into world building. You have your characters along with the character development, getting an understanding of what the character, what their role is within the story, and how they interact with the environment around them. So we're going to start with Janice. What are your thoughts on when putting together the world building aspects? How important it is to really solidify what the character purpose is within that story? Or should it be left more to the reader's interpretation?
It's a great question. I think sometimes I almost leave it up to the characters, which sounds ridiculous, but sometimes they sort of write themselves. I don't know if you both would
Yeah.
agree with me, but I start
Totally.
with my outline, and then sometimes I start writing, and I realize, well, that's not where this person is trying to go somehow, and so you, not that you rewrite the whole story because there's a clear point that you're trying to make in the end, um, but sometimes they take you in other directions. I think, your characters are a vehicle for the things that you want to say in different ways. And so there are many different ways to say it. So I think if we're too rigid about how we want our characters to be portrayed or the things that they want to say, then they may not be getting to the point where we want them to be or to make the point to the reader that we want them to make.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. A
Yeah.
very good point. I'm glad you brought that up.
Honestly,
Khaled, what are
I
your thoughts?
completely agree. I think early on, I maybe was too rigid in, trying to be absolute with outlining and planning and everything. And like Janice said, sometimes you get to a point where you're writing and you realize, like, well, this doesn't make sense. This is kind of where this character wants to go, and it's not what I had in mind, but this is better anyway. And like you said, I think if you plan the characters out really well, then they determine the story for you a lot of times. And it's more fun that way, to be honest with you, because as a writer, yeah,
I think it is
right.
too. It's almost like you're hearing the story along with your readers, right? It just kind of comes, I know for me, it comes flying out of my fingers on my
Yeah.
keyboard. And I'm like, where did that come from? Right. And then I'll have a beta reader say to me, how did you come up with that? I'm like, I don't know. It just kind of
Yeah.
appeared on the page somehow. It's
Right, and
Harry
it's
Potter-esque, I
interesting
guess.
because, like, you get surprised by your own story a lot of times where it's like, "Wow, like, I didn't see that coming in."
Right.
It's like, but I'm writing the story.
Right. And do you find that when you go back and reread
Yeah,
something, you're like, I don't even
absolutely. It's like,
remember writing
"Wait,
that?
when did I think of that?"
Right.
Mm, all the time.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
more creative
Yep.
than I thought I was.
Mhm. Definitely.
Yeah.
So when you come to writing, like, is it good to kind of, how can I put it? Like, pretty much the premise of this your story. Is it good to kind of like layer it out in the beginning and then kind of flesh it out as the story goes along? Or is it something that you kind of gradually input as the story goes along? What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's no right or wrong way. It depends on what process works better for you. When I first said I wanted to write, I was talking with a friend who said, make an outline, just simple chapter thoughts, and then go back to the beginning, flush each one out a little bit more, then go back to the top again and flush each one out. And I thought that was a good idea. And when I did that, the book basically wrote itself. But this is Brooks Promise when I did the first one. And then I had it edited, and the editor said to me, this is kind of heavy. This is like a big, deep story. I think you need a distracting story, something a little bit lighter in the background of that. Okay. I thought, oh boy, like, how am I going to do that? So I wrote 5 or 6 chapters of a different storyline and wove it in. So I looked at my original outline, like, well, I guess I could put the first one in there and then stick it in here. And I gave the whole thing to my sister, who's always my beta reader. And she said, I like both stories, but I don't get it. Like, why is there this second story? What does this have to do with the first one? So I had to be very careful to weave them together so that the reader, maybe, I don't remember, halfway through, 2/3 of the way through the book, goes, oh, now I see how these characters are gonna, and then at the very end, I thought, oh, okay, I really have to link these better at the end. And then I just had this epiphany of how that would work. And because I had this storyline written, and then it's, oh, if I make this person that person, right? Then it's all going to work in the end. And it did. But then I've had people read it and say, I really love the book, but I don't understand why there's this whole second storyline. You don't need that.
You
Okay.
can't please everybody.
No, you really can. In the end, I like it with the second storyline. Would it have been fine without it? I don't know. But the process itself was fill it in, fill it in a little bit more, read the whole thing, and then say, I think this needs a little more depth. Or like I'm finding with the writing that I'm doing for my third novel, which I'm maybe 2/3 of the way through the first draft, I'm finding now that I'm trying to get to the end before I've really explained it enough. Like I have my outline and somebody's going to read it and go, oh, well, isn't that cute? It's like a sitcom where everything's resolved in 22 minutes. Like, so I'm going to need, I think, a few more chapters in between to kind of
Right.
flush it all out a little bit better so that the reader says, I understand how this character got from A to Z. We didn't skip over LMNOP, right? So
Yeah, good point.
that's probably a way longer answer than you were looking for, but like I told you before, I could talk all day. So
No.
No, we appreciate it, Janice.
Yeah,
Callie, you
I
got
guess it's
any
a
more
little
added
bit of a
thoughts?
different animal for me. With mine being fantasy, so by nature there are a lot of characters, a lot of storylines that go into it, especially since it was always intended to be a series. And so, with that in mind, those different character arcs have to kind of intertwine. So I knew that from the beginning, and I think like that's probably why it took a good 8 years to write my first book, just because one, the world building, but two, like you mentioned, Janice, just trying to figure out the right way to intertwine those characters and have those different storylines come together at a certain point that felt genuine. So it just took a lot of planning, and I'm sure I could have done it faster if I was writing full time. But I think as you mentioned at the beginning of your answer, you outline at the start, and sometimes it helps to just see where it goes from there and then kind of regroup and tweak that outline, and that's essentially what I do as well, where for each book in this series I figure out where what my main character's arcs need to be for that specific story. So I have the starting point, I have an ending point in mind, for that specific book about where they need to get to. But then I think that's kind of more loose for me, and then I go chapter by chapter because it's always going to focus on a different character from one chapter to the next anyway. But at the same time, I have to keep in mind that this is all building towards something cohesive. So certain details have to add up to something else that happened in a previous chapter or with a different character, or these things are happening at the same time. So I have to make sure that this aligns correctly. Just to make sure that there are no plot holes or anything like that. So it's just something where I it's a fine line between being loose about the outline, but also being very finely detailed with like certain things that are happening. And I think it just takes a lot of patience to just I think figure all that out.
Good point. And just for me to inject a little bit, uh, yes, I'm working currently too on a new book. So in my particular case, though, I'm doing short stories, a collection of short stories. So for you guys out there, viewers out there, if that's the direction you're going into, is doing short stories, world building, developing your concept, developing the characters, man, you really have to be tuned in precisely
Yeah.
because they're short stories. So with Janice and with Khaled, they could kind of flesh it out over a few pages because they're writing out a full-fledged novel. Whereas with a short story, you got to be more precise. You don't have a lot of room there as far as really developing characters. You just need to allow the reader to get a basic understanding and let the story kind of take a life of its own to really develop that character, get an understanding of that character. And then the world building as well. You may not want to spend too much time being so elaborate in your descriptions as far as like describing every little thing that's going on in the background or within the environment. So these are just things to keep in mind depending for your viewers what type of writer you want to be. If you're doing a novel, then you have the luxury of like expanding on these certain thoughts versus if you're doing short stories, not so much. You kind of got to hone it in a little bit better. So great thoughts from both of you on that regard. So let's go to our next vantage point. So we discussed the concept, discussed world building, excuse me. We discussed how to develop these characters, how to have them interact with the environment that you're creating within the story. So now we've got to start designing thoughts and dialogue, which can be very tricky because when it comes to dialogue, you definitely don't want to get to the point where you sound too preachy, or maybe you have a certain character that's speaking too much and it's not too much interaction going on with the other characters that's involved with the story. So we'll start with you, Khalid. Um, I kind of want to point it in this direction. Is dialogue always essential when it comes to putting
I think
together your
so.
story? Or can someone be effective enough to create a really interesting story
For
without too
me,
much
I
dialogue?
find it to be essential just because I think you get more in tune with character personalities. And even aside from that, I'm big on the character interactions. I think that's one of the things that makes my story flow. And so I love, having situations where two or three characters are together because you learn about them based on their dialogue, their interactions. And so personally, that dialogue is one of the things that drives my story, and I love writing it. So as I see it, it's essential. Just because again, like I have a lot of fun doing it, and I find that sometimes it helps me learn more about my characters because it makes me one think about how are they responding realistically in this situation, but two, how do I let their personality show through the way they're talking to other people or interacting with other people? And that could be with people they're familiar with or being thrown into a brand new situation. Like how do real people handle these types of things? And so I started off basing that on, even with my series, basing my characters off of real people just to have a starting point, just to see how I could tackle it realistically. And then it kind of went from there once I became more comfortable and a stronger writer in general. So, I didn't necessarily have to rely on, what would this person do in real life? It was more like what makes sense to this character. But like I said, I think the dialogue is super important for especially the longer stories, like for novels, things like that, because it gives you a different way to connect to the character.
Awesome. Awesome. What about you, Janice?
Oh, I totally agree. And it's making me think how important it is to make sure that your characters speak differently from each other so they don't sound like you. Not because it's bad that they sound like you, the author, but because people are so different. Do you ever watch a TV show where you find that I don't know, I'm not thinking of one in particular, but in certain shows, a character will leave the show and they'll bring in a new character, and
Yeah.
you think it sounds just like the old one, or like, why is every detective in this particular unit do and say everything the same way, or every doctor in this hospital breaks the rules in the same manner? And you're like, oh, this is not how real life is, right? So I try really hard to make sure that my characters sound different from each other. I do a little bit of what you do of, kind of thinking about who do I know that I'm trying to model this character a little bit like, and then, how would this person say it or how would this person do it? I was reading a book a couple of years ago that was very well regarded and everybody loved it. And I thought, this is really very interesting. It was kind of half research and half story about a family, and it was trying to use this family to display the research that it was. I don't even know how to explain it. But anyway, and as I read it, I thought it's a very interesting story, but I'm finding it kind of a slog to get through. And it took me a long time to figure out why. And I finally identified that there was no dialogue in this book, almost, right? It was all description about this family and who was doing what, and description about the research that was going into the condition that this family had. All very interesting and very well written. But it was so dense because there was no conversation to bring it some air, I guess. Is I don't know how else to say that. And so a lot of people loved it. That's great, and I would have liked it a lot better had it had any kind of conversation in it. So I've kept that really in mind, to stop. And also some editors will tell you, don't tell me,
Yeah.
show
Yeah,
me,
to that point,
right?
I mean, I think the dialogue helps to break
Yeah,
up the
good point.
exposition too, because I think if you're just writing the exposition for so long, you can fall into that trap of like tell instead of show, and it
Right.
can get repetitive, and it definitely helps to switch the I guess the the like, switch gears, from maybe fast paced to slow paced, or just like just give you a different look at the characters, like you were saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also depends a lot on what person you're writing in. I my first two books and now the third one I'm working on are all in third person. So I have to be pretty careful. And people have pointed out to me that I'm not careful enough about having my characters speak in their own voice. And I'm not even saying this right. Within one chapter, I might be in the brain of several different characters, and readers are like, oh, you can't do that. So I'm really trying to fix that. And I'm thinking for my fourth book, when I finally get to that, I'm going to try to write in first person, because then, aside from the fact that I find every book I pick up lately is written in first person, but besides that, I feel like that will keep me honest. That'll keep me focused, this one character. And if she doesn't know it, like, she can only know it by what she surmises or what people tell her. I can't be in the head of my other characters because she's not, right? So I think that's going to be a fun experiment to try. We'll see if it's a
It is a
success or a
good time.
failure.
One of the side projects I'm working on for probably when I'm done with this series is a first person that's based on myself as a teenager, and it is really fun to just write from yourself for a
That's
change. Just
fun.
be able to be yourself, like as a
Yeah.
narrator. It's so relieving and so cathartic to just be yourself in a book,
Have you ever heard a song called
and I don't
Letter
think so.
to Me? It's a country song. I want to say it's Brad Paisley, I think, but I wouldn't swear to it. And he is probably in his 30s or 40s, I suppose, in the narration of the song. And he says, if I could write a letter to me at 17, like, this is what I would say. It is so fantastic to try to look back at what was important to me when I was 17. Why was it important? Why did it feel like the world was going to come crashing down if this, that, or the other didn't happen? And he's now saying from his vantage point in his, I don't know, 30s or 40s, that those are nowhere near the best days of your life. Wait till you see your children and wife. It's
Well,
amazing. I don't know if you
yeah,
like country music, doesn't matter.
that's
Just
awesome.
even read the lyrics. Don't, if you don't feel like listening to it, that's fine. But I don't know, it
Absolutely.
might help a little bit. Yeah.
We'll check it out.
It's a
You know,
great
I don't,
song.
I don't
I'm
discriminate.
open to
It
all
sounds
kinds of
good.
music, so
Yep.
you get inspiration anywhere.
Yeah,
Definitely.
absolutely. So I have this running joke with my son who is really big into rap and R&B, and he'll say, I can't listen to your country music. Like, the poetry might be there, but the vehicle it's in. And I was like, same, like, when he shows me the lyrics, I can say, wow, that's incredibly moving. So interesting. Rap artists have so much to say, but I'm not a fan of the sound of it. So show it to me on paper And so we can kind of talk to each other about the music that we
That's
like.
really cool.
Um, right?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, for you viewers out there, just to get a quick summary of this, just a couple things to keep in mind that Khalid and Janice alluded to is definitely when you're developing your characters. Obviously, this is part of that process, right? Developing characters is to create that dialogue, but just to make certain that you don't make it in a way where the characters start blending in together and they sound the same. You want every character to have their own identity, and you're going to do that through the dialogue, but also too to make the dialogue a little bit organic. I feel like any type of genre that you write in, you can still write it in a way where it's going to allow the reader to resonate with it. You definitely don't want to put so much complexity to the dialogue where it gets to the point like I really don't understand what they're saying. Not even in the confines of the story, but just literally what they're saying. Like I just feel like it just don't feel natural, especially if you're portraying that character a certain way, but the dialogue doesn't match that. So where I come from, a big saying is your walk got to match your talk. So I kind of apply that to my stories as well. Is if they're going to express themselves in a certain type of way, especially verbally, then their actions have to kind of coincide with that as well. So for your viewers, just keep that in mind as well. That adds to the cohesiveness of your story, because you definitely don't want to get into a situation where they're about 10 pages in and you're all over the place. It's abstract is your characters, especially the dialogue, and it's just like, you know what? And they'll just fling the book to the side and it starts collecting dust somewhere. It's like I don't want nothing to do with it no more, because I can invest in the character to a certain extent, but this dialogue is terrible. Like they're not making really any sense for me enough to invest myself any more into the story, if that makes any sense. So great points for both of you from that regard, from that vantage point, which will move us to our next vantage point, which is creating emotional depth. So we just started talking about the dialogue, and this goes perfectly along with it. So now you have to start expressing different types of emotions within your character so that it adds just to the understanding, not just for the story itself, but for the reader to really be invested in the character. Obviously, stories are really character driven. You're not really reading stories simply because, oh, the way he described the mountains and the setting and all that, they'll appreciate that. But it really just comes down to the characters and how you portray them through your story. So we'll start with you, Janice. How important it is for a writer to develop a range, this emotional range, when it comes to the characters that you're writing about.
Well, you're portraying real people, of course. So real people have real emotions, most of them anyway, um, to varying degrees of ability to express those emotions, right? So we all know people in our lives who are very emotive and you kind of always know where they stand, and other people who are very, keep um, their thoughts and emotions very close to the vest and you no idea where they're coming from. So I think it's important to have characters who do both of those things, and a range in between, of course, right? Just the way real life would be. So, and what does the story insist that these characters emote about? Right. So, I mean, my stories are because they are medical in nature. And for people who are watching and listening today, pardon my dog barking in the background. I am a genetic counselor and I write about genetic conditions. That's not the point of the story. The point of the story is to be a family drama, but the drama unfolds around these genetic conditions. And so there's a lot of emotion to that, right? You're talking about, a baby who's born with some kind of metabolic problem. That's the first book. The second one is about a man who develops a cancer that has to do with a hereditary cancer syndrome in his family. And so, I mean, I can't think of much more emotional fodder than that. And so if my characters didn't portray a lot of emotion, that would be really disingenuous, I think, right?
Mm.
So they have to, but they express it differently. And people cope with these kinds of things differently. And then they have trouble coping with each other because of the way they're handling things. You know, why aren't you more upset? Well, why are you so worried when this hasn't happened yet? And right. And so you can see people who would respond that way. So I think as long as it feels real, there's no right or wrong way to do it.
Good
I
point.
think it ties
Khaled?
into honestly everything we've talked about previously as well, like the world building, the dialogue, the exposition. Just because that's how you show the depth of your characters, the emotions. You know, so certain characters, those emotions might take place non-verbally. You know, they might go into a shell and remove themselves from the situation or from everybody else. Where other characters, you know, you'll see full emotions on display, and I think that's part of the essentials of creating a character and thinking them through before you start even writing is think about how do they handle certain situations, when faced with this type of tragedy or this type of obstacle, how do they respond. I think a lot of that goes into the planning process before you start even writing, because it makes it easier to I think through those situations and those developments in the story once they're faced with certain, like I said, obstacles or situations. And like Janice said, it definitely helps to base it on your experiences, your expertise, or things that you've seen other people do. Because in real life, those those things are much more genuine and realistic. So it's not a bad thing to base it off how you've seen other people or yourself handle those situations, and and how they've reacted to them. My one of my main characters in book one, he finds out something about his twin brother that really sets him off the edge. And I think up to that point, most people, he's the main character, so you're rooting for him. But then he does this self-destructive thing where he essentially tries to burn down his village because he's so caught up in his own misery that's how he handles it. And one of the things I was hoping for were readers would be like, what the hell, this is our hero, why is he being so immature about this? But I think that's
I always
good,
like that.
because yeah, I mean, even your heroes, they're gonna have flaws, they're gonna have imperfections, and I think that's real life. Nobody's black and white. There's all those shades of gray, and even the best people don't handle everything in the best way. Yeah.
And vice versa. Even the
Right.
worst people can surprise you sometimes,
Hmm.
right? And it is really nice to see characters, whether it's a movie, a TV show, a
Yeah,
book,
it's more
that
fun.
surprise you, right? Just when you least expect it, they come out with something really profound, or they do something really stupid, and you're like, that's not like
Yeah,
you, but it's
and it
human
just makes
nature
for better
and it's good.
storytelling as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, great points. So for you viewers out there, another thing too we should bring up too is the fact that great point that you made about pulling from personal experience to really drive home to the emotional aspect of your characters. But also too, it's okay if you have a couple characters that show similarity when it comes to their emotions. Just that's where the depth comes into play, where you create this range. So maybe you have a character that from the onset, they're very angry in nature. Maybe they're just mad at the world type of mentality, or because of, something tragic that happened in their past. That's what transformed them to being the person they are now presently. And you can have someone that can have that same attitude where they're kind of angry as well, but maybe you can temperament a little bit more. Maybe have it there's a purpose
Right.
behind their anger more so than this character over here who is just naturally like, look, I don't care about anything. I'm just going
Yeah.
to tear things up. You know what I mean? I'm just going to see,
Mhm.
sort of like the Joker. There's really that character in the comics. It's kind of like he's a villain, but there's no real true purpose to why he is the way he is. He
Right.
just likes to see the world burn for whatever reason. You
Well, but
know,
then when they came out with that movie, The Joker, you say, "Oh, now I get it. Now I
yeah,
see why he is the way he is, and he's a much more sympathetic character than he had been all along." Yeah.
But usually, like in the comics, you know, they kind of display the Joker as like just this maniac. You know, they don't really give it like too much range as far as like the different emotions that he expressed. It's just basically, look, I'm all about chaos. Like he said in The Dark Knight, I'm an agent of chaos, right? But you can have somebody similar to that character, but they have more emotional range. Maybe you could just kind of temperament a little bit more where there's a purpose behind the why they're acting the way they're acting. So that's the beauty of writing, guys. You know, there's different ways to go about reaching your destination, your goal. You know, you don't have to necessarily be so tuned in on one way of doing things, especially when you're trying to create these emotions and these attitudes displayed in the story for these
Just to add
characters.
on to that real quick,
Um, just make
I was
sure
just
it's
going to add
cohesive.
on. I mean, that
Yeah, go ahead,
honestly
Kyle.
also adds to the whole conflict, which is what drives, sometimes, like you said, you might have two characters that will handle their emotions similarly, but conversely, it's a lot of fun when you can put two characters together that don't handle things the same way, because it just drives the conflict. It's like, well, why aren't you talking about this? I want to talk about this. Or why did you handle it like this? It just adds to the actual conflict of the story and the tension. And that's what really, I think matters to readers as well, is, that tension, that conflict, because they want to see how it's going to resolve, or can be resolved, or how are these characters going to get through this to maybe finally get along or resolve the situation.
Right. And I think if the reader finds himself saying, "Ooh, I can see this one from both
Yeah,
sides," you've done a good job.
absolutely.
Very good point. I like that.
Yeah.
Definitely. So it's definitely food for thought for you guys out there. You know, this it's multiple different ways to express these emotions. Just make sure that your character is actually expressing some type of emotion through the story. You don't want to make the characters dull in comparison. Whereas, again, like I mentioned moments ago, they're not going to be invested in your story anymore because it's just like, okay, I could kind of maybe deal with this character over here or this character over here, but especially your main character, they just seem very dull, very boring. There's really no type of complexity to the character. You know, usually you're gonna lose a reader
Yeah.
and they're not going to be really invested. So great points all around. So now we go to our next vantage point, which is diversity in writing. So for some people, it's very important when it comes to diversity, including people of different cultural backgrounds, maybe religious backgrounds, um, but also diversity as far as giving more enlightenment to like the different things as far as how can I put it? For example, we'll use Khaled for example when it comes to the fantasy. You know, usually when people think of fantasy, if you think of like maybe you're going to put a wizard or a sorcerer or some type a character similar to that within your story, oh, they have to be all about like they look like Gandalf from Lord of the Rings. You know, they have the pointy hat, they have some kind of like robe, usually some type of staff, magical staff. Ooh, you got little sparkles that come out their hands to show the power in them, and maybe the powers are the same as you've seen in another video or another movie, television show, or another story that you read. We'll start with you, Khaled. How important it is to kind of be really diverse, not just with the type of characters, if you're going to put that aspect of like a different cultural backgrounds, religious backgrounds, but just not to stick to the stereotypes. If you're going to put, because frankly, a lot of us we all write in the same genres. It's not like there's one fantasy writer, you know, or run one type of writer that writes suspense or horror. It's just all these different genres. But sometimes people get caught up in the stereotypes where a certain character has to be this type of way because this is the genre that they're writing. So, how important it is for a writer to be diverse and kind of think outside the box, basically, when it
I
comes to their
mean,
writing.
I think it's crucial, to be honest with you, because that's just how the world is. It's a diverse place, and if you want people to be able to read your story and appreciate it and connect with it, and form that empathy that, like, they should for your characters, diversity is definitely key. And like you mentioned, that doesn't necessarily just have to be culturally. That could be religiously, socially, sexual orientation, whatever it is. Like that's what real people are all about. Like, they're like whatever similarities we have, we also have differences and different backgrounds that we're coming from, different reasons for doing what we're doing. So I don't think you can necessarily have an authentic story without focusing on diversity in some form. And honestly, I've been obviously a minority for in many capacities my whole life, and that was one of, I think, the catalysts for me starting to write. So my background is Guyanese, and coming from suburbs which were predominantly white, most people didn't know what that was. They saw a brown kid and assumed I was Indian, and that's all well and good, but
Mhm.
that's not what my culture is. And despite the fact that there are some similarities, it's a very different culture and way of life. And so when I got to college, my closest friends even thought I was lying about being Guyanese. They're like, "Oh, you're just making that up because you're like embarrassed that you're Indian." And I was like, "Wow, that's messed up." And they didn't necessarily mean it. What's that?
That's really messed
They didn't necessarily
That's
mean it
really
in like a
messed up.
mean way. They were ribbing me. And so like, because I think that was late 90s, and I think a lot of people just probably weren't aware as much as they are now. That was the funny thing was there was like a store that a few of them went to, and they saw a keychain that had the Guyanese flag on it, and they're like, "Oh wow, you've been telling the truth this whole time." But again, that was a lot of joking around, not necessarily meant to be like discriminatory or anything like that. uh, and even my group of friends, it's a very diverse group of people, and so again, I think when you're making authentic characters, you take all that into mind. Where these people are coming from, what are their motivations for what they're doing, and how are people going to treat them, interact with them. Not because I think the first time you interact with anybody, you're not necessarily seeing their personality first. You're seeing what they look like, and that has a lot to do with like how people talk to you, how people view you, and until they get to know the type of person that you actually are. So I think yes, genre matters, but at the same time, characters can transcend genres, and I think it's a universal thing that diversity is important no matter what genre it is.
Good point. Before you elaborate, Janice, I'm cracking up over here because I definitely relate to you, Khaled,
Yeah.
because I went through that growing up as well.
Uh-huh.
So I'm Puerto Rican, but the first thing when people see me is like, man, you're Italian, no doubt about it. You look Italian. You got this
Uh-huh.
complexion. Look at this. You got the thick brows and whatnot. Ain't nothing. But I'm
Hmm.
like, but look at my name. I mean, what Italian person with Cruz as a last name? I mean, that's predominantly a Hispanic name. Anything can happen, but it was like I just find that crazy. Like someone else kind of went through that as well. I just got the
Yeah.
ribbon a lot from that. They're like, man, you can't be Hispanic. Plus, too, like
Okay.
I don't speak fluent Spanish, so I could
Mhm.
do enough to like order a meal. I could definitely understand if somebody talks to me, and I could read it. It's just a weird thing. Like I can't like hold a very long conversation in Spanish. Um, and unfortunately, I never got around to like
The
really
older you
learning
get, the
it
harder it
so I
is.
could speak it fluently. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Plus, you get caught up with a bunch of other stuff as well. But I just thought that was ironic. Like, sometimes you feel like
Yeah.
you're the only one that goes through something type of situation. So that's why I'm cracking up over here because I'm like, okay, somebody else went through the same pain as I did with all the little corny jokes and all that kind of stuff. So, okay, that's enough of that. Janice, what is your thoughts?
Oh God, where do I start? I agree 100% with everything Khalid said. I think it is really, really important to portray the world as diverse as it is and to embrace that diversity. The only caveat I would give to that is it's really hard to understand somebody else's perspective. And we haven't walked in your shoes and we haven't been, maybe assumed to be a different nationality than we actually are, or history or whatever. I mean, I've certainly faced my own misconceptions about me over the years, and it is frustrating. But I think we just have to be a little bit careful not to think we know more than we do, because if we portray it badly, it's
Yeah.
worse than not portraying it at all, right? So, you never want your reader to say, "Ugh, like, don't speak for me. Don't pretend you know what I've been through," or right? So that's really hard. And I know with the perspective of my work, I could fall into the trap of, say, writing for
Oh
somebody
yeah.
with a
Yeah.
disability. And I could do that all sorts of wrong. And I feel like that would make it a lot worse. So if you're going to have your characters be really different from who you are or what your experiences have been, just make sure you do a lot of research and or involve
Right.
people of the background that you're trying to portray, and say, did I do that right? Like, I don't want to insult anybody, and I don't want to minimize or overemphasize, or not that any two people's experiences are going to be the same, but at least to try to
Right.
not do that.
Yeah, and to your point, oh, sorry, no, I was just gonna say, I think even more important than doing like the research, because you're just getting that information, like to read, talking to people like about what they've been through. That like there's nothing that I think compares to that level of authenticity.
Right, exactly. So I would say do it, but do
Yeah.
it right, to the extent that you're able. Um, and obviously, I'm not speaking to you. I'm speaking like to a larger audience. If you're going to try to write from a diversified perspective, which I would encourage, just make sure you're careful about it so that you don't do more
Right.
harm than good.
Very good point. So, for your viewers out there, definitely avoid the stereotypes. They could be offensive,
Oh yeah,
whether it's you're doing it from a cultural or a social background, or it's not so much offensive, but it takes away from the story of what I previously talked about of like certain characters are being developed and you stick to a certain stigma. Like this is how they're supposed to be portrayed because you're writing in this genre. Great point that you made, Jan. Just be careful because it's easy to for words to be misconstrued. So maybe in your heart of hearts, you meant well, your intent was well, but your execution failed. So
exactly.
kind of keep all that in balance, or keep that all in mind. But also too, the fact that we live in a world that is diverse, why wouldn't you want to incorporate that into your stories? It just makes obvious sense. Goes back to what we've been kind of been the central theme of this discussion of pulling from personal experience and putting that into your stories. I think people in the end are going to just be more invested because as they read, it's like, wow, I actually went through that. And it's amazing how somebody else went through that as well. Because that's not a notion that we kind of go by a lot. Sometimes we do feel like truly like what I just said about, me being Italian and I'm really Puerto Rican and what Khaled went through. Um, that some people really truly feel like they're the only
Mhm.
ones that actually went through that. So if you make your story more personal in that regard and you make it as diverse and you bring in all these experiences that you went through, I mean, you're not the only one that went through heartbreak. You're not the only one that's went through maybe a moment of depression, maybe a moment in time where you doubted yourself. You made mistakes. We're all imperfect. So if you could bring all of these type of different attributes into your story, I just feel in the end that your story is just going to
Right.
be that much more better, regardless of what genre that you're writing. You can still make it wholesome and something endearing where people can invest in
No,
and
what you're
take
describing
something
to
out of it.
some extent is why
Yeah.
support groups are so important, because a lot of people do feel like they're alone. And then if they find their way or they're referred to a support group, they suddenly realize they're not alone and their experiences are not as unique as they think they are. But I think that one thing you reminded me of when you were talking too is there are times certainly that our readers are going to be angry
Yeah.
with some of our characters because they do and say mean, stupid, awful, horrible things. That's part of the point. But you never want your reader to be angry with you as the author, right? For
Yeah.
portraying something badly. Right. So if you have a character to be angry with, I mean, they always said that on soap operas. This is the one you love to hate. That's a good thing, right? It adds complexity and richness to your story. But you don't want your reader, like you said before, to toss the book aside and say, like, I can't handle this anymore. It's unrealistic. It's stereotypical. It's shallow, whatever it might be. You want them not to
Mhm.
say, "Ooh,
Yeah.
swing and a miss," you know?
Mhm. Definitely good points. So just keep it in mind for your viewers out there. You know, there's a way of going about expressing diversity through your writing. Just be careful. Just be mindful. Words are powerful and they definitely can hurt. So just keep that in mind. So now we go to our final vantage point. So we talked about all these amazing things involving with the writing process. So now you might want to come to the point in your literary journey, viewers, where you want to transition the craft of writing into a viable business. So we'll start with you, Janice. How can one take their craft, their art form when it comes to writing and make it into a business?
Not sure you're asking the right person because I don't know that I've been successful at doing that.
I feel like you're a success. You and Kyler are a success because you're published. You
Well,
know,
I
that's that
appreciate that,
that's
but
something nobody can take from you. That's an accomplishment in itself.
I appreciate that, but and I don't mean to take away from, or sound like really self-deprecating, but I self-published because the world of publishing has gotten so complicated and so competitive and so difficult that I felt like if I were to send, 150 query letters to different publishers or agents rather, I would find one person willing to, represent my work, and then it would still be a long, long process to find, if we even did find a publisher willing to publish it. And then, the publisher has a lot of the creative control, and it all takes, 1,000 years. Considering all of that and the fact that I was working full time the whole time I was writing, I said, I can't do this. So I self-published, and that was very easy. And so, and I have a dear friend who's a graphic artist who designed the covers for my novels. And so I didn't need a publishing company to do the artwork for me. Um, so I did it on my own. And not that I think that's a bad idea, but when you do it on your own, you have no publicity, no marketing, unless you do it yourself or hire somebody else to do it, which is, of course, very expensive. And so the metric I always use is, how many books would I need to sell to reimburse myself for that particular expense? And I did not go into writing to make money. I'm not looking to be the next J.K. Rowling. I did this to get my points across, to teach people, to try to um, do for genetics what, say, Lisa Genova has done for neuroscience, where, she wrote books like Still Alice and Inside the O'Briens, and all books on neurologic conditions that she brought into the mainstream by family stories. So that was kind of my goal. And it's really frustrating to spend, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours to write something that maybe only 300 people are going to read. Um, but I'm not J.K. Rowling, right? So um, that's okay. I don't need to be, but I think I lost the plot along the way of my long answer. So I apologize for that. But there's no one way to do this, right? And I'm going to just let Khalid speak and maybe
I definitely know what.
take
No,
us a
you made
little
some good
further.
points. And Callie, and your thoughts?
Yeah, so similar to what Janice was saying, I went through an independent publisher, which is essentially self-publishing, except you have like, oh, where you have somebody handling a lot of like the non-writing stuff for you. And so I think a lot of people who are new to writing and just thinking like I'm going to write a book, they don't realize the back end of it, where you have to focus on the marketing, the publicity, getting people actually interested in coming to you. And so it definitely helps to have an idea of what success means to you specifically, whether you want millions of copies sold every year or whether you're comfortable with like just people who can relate to specifically your topic and your story. You definitely have to have that in mind before you finish, I think, because that's going to dictate whether you're sending your manuscript to an agent, whether you want to just self-publish instead and have more creative control. And again, even with the self-publishing and independent publishing aspect of it, a lot of it is on you to like foot the costs of book events, author events, the festivals, the like buying copies of your book, and like Janice, you said, you kind of have to figure out, does this make sense to do this, like as far as, coming out in the black, and, am I going to make more money by being at this event, as opposed to, just spending the like hundreds of dollars and then selling 5 copies. Is that worthwhile to me? So I think, back to what your question is, as far as like successful in terms of business, you have to kind of have an idea of what you want to do with this manuscript once it's done, and what that success actually looks like.
Good point. You both nailed what I was asking for, as far as what I was looking for as an answer. Transitioning the craft of writing into a viable business. Just for everybody out there, for your viewers out there, just understand there's more than one way, again, to get to your destination. Janet just spoke to self-publishing. That is an option out there. And also to go to an independent publisher. It's not to say you couldn't try to reach out to the bigger publishing firms and go that way. I mean, they have a marketing machine behind them. They can provide all these different resources and the things you need, a platform to go ahead and market and endorse yourself as a writer, as an author. But I think you hit the nail on the coffin, both of you, when it comes to what is your true intent when you go into writing. If you wanted to make it a career, almost like a full-time job, your 9 to 5, if you have the opportunity to do that. I know I'm right with you guys in the same realm. In the end, I do want it to be like, I do wish I could get to the point where I could just wake up in the morning, get a cup of coffee, and be like uh Stephen King, and just get up, get some coffee, write a few pages,
Same.
have some lunch, go back, write a few more pages,
Sell a
and
few
just,
million copies of
they
the
make
book.
a movie out of everything I'm writing. I would love for that to happen, because I knew since a young age I wanted to be a writer. There's nothing like writing. I know for your viewers out there, I do Olympian Multimedia, so my hands is everywhere. I do music, photography, videos, digital design, but there's just nothing like getting a fresh notebook and you could kind of just see the words come alive in the pages, and you didn't even write a word yet, but you visualizing it already. Like, I love writing. There's nothing like it in the world. And me going into it and doing what I'm doing, I definitely agree with you, Janice, of how complicated it can be, the process of going to these big publishing firms. So it's so fortunate that we're able to put our art form out there by self-publishing. Yes, it is daunting for you viewers out there. It's very daunting, especially when it comes to marketing. That's a giant in itself, just to find out creative ways to try to get your books out there. Clearly, a big component is the book events. We definitely are suggesting that, to get as many events as possible throughout the year, to showcase your work, showcase your books. Um, there's other methods. That could be a topic for another day that we can discuss. But it's all about finding the right method that works for you. You can't base your agenda off what someone else is doing, because that might be working for them, but it's not going to work for you. It can get very expensive, just like any other art form as well. So taking consideration a budget and working in the confines of your budget, and then to Janice's point of getting an understanding of what can you do, or how many books you need to sell to get your ROI back. That's all things important as well. And only you know that. A lot of people can give you a lot of different tips. You should go use this platform. Maybe you should do this. You should do that. And it's all well and good. And they probably meant well telling you. And they probably found some kind of success. But just remember, for you viewers out there, you have to do what's best for yourself. This is your art form. So don't allow anybody to kind of change your character or change your mentality in a way, that deviates from your true purpose as a writer and what you want to do with your writing and what you want to do with your books. Just things to keep in mind.
And
There's options, is basically what we're trying to say.
to that
You
point,
just got to explore 'em.
I've had the luxury of connecting with a couple of authors who were published through like the big five, in the past few months. And one of the things they said is you have to be very patient with traditional publishers. You can query and query and query and look for an agent, and even once you have that, it takes time for them to pitch it to the right people. And one of the frustrations that I've heard multiple times is it can take years to get your manuscript from a finished manuscript to a published book, and that's again through the big five. I've definitely met other people who just got tired of waiting or didn't like giving up that amount of creative control and decided, you know what, I'm not going to bother, even though I technically got an offer from one of the big five. You know what, it's not for me. I'm just going to switch to publishing, and at least I know that the story I wanted to write, the story that I've put out there, is staying intact, and it's the way I want it to be. So as you said, there are advantages to both, and it really comes down to what's best for you.
I think that's a really good point which you made. It's about when you're going into it, and if you're going to try to make your writing into a business, it's how much control you're willing to give up. Because you're definitely going to get it if you're going toward the bigger companies. They have their own agenda,
Right.
and they're looking to get a return on their investment.
Yeah.
Especially if they're going to be pouring a lot of resources and money into you to try to get you, create a platform for you. So definitely look at it from that regard as well. If you don't mind losing a little bit of creative control or a lot,
Yeah.
depending on who you go to. Again, we are not telling you not to go in that direction if that's the best fit for you. I know for me personally, I need that control. I want to write what I want to write, and I want to write it in the way I want to write it. So that probably is not going to be a route I'll ever go. But then again, to Janice's point, I'm not looking to be like the greatest writer ever in the history of mankind. I'm not looking to make a name for myself. If I could get to the point where I could take care of my family comfortably and everybody's happy, everybody's healthy, and I continue to do what I love to do, then I feel like I reached my goal. But everybody's goals are different, Just do what's best for you, please.
Yeah.
Don't let anything deter you from your goal or what you're really trying to accomplish. So usually at this point in time, since we went through all the vantage points, usually I try to bust in a little bit of a workshop here. But I'm going to switch things up a little bit, and
Okay.
I'm just going to kind of tailor fit this whole thing into like one question for both of you guys. And we discuss in detail about the concept in the world building, character development, how to create and design dialogue, and then try to input this emotional depth into your story. So out of all them elements that we discuss, I would love to know from each one of you, which is the hardest to manifest in your story. Oh, bless you, James.
Oh, thank you.
So either one can go. What do you think is the hardest in your opinion when you're developing your story? Is it the world building? Is it the character development? Is it creating the dialogue? Or is it trying to input that emotional depth into the story?
You want to go
Anyone can go.
first? um, I can say for
What do you
me,
think is the hardest?
I think the world building is the toughest aspect of it for me, and I can only speak to fantasy because that's what my books are. But so I'm creating a lot of things from scratch. A lot of cultures, religions, historical backgrounds, and mythology, and everything like that. And granted, it's a lot of fun to world build, but I think the issue is it's time consuming. It takes a lot of time to do it, and you can definitely get into the mindset that I'm not technically writing, so this is am I wasting my time? But it's so crucial to the story to world build, where you have to do it in order for your story to be authentic and for people to be able to connect with it. Whether it's I think the character development goes into that aspect as well. Just making sure your characters are well developed and authentic and complete. And same thing for the world around them. And to that point. I mentioned before, like, my side project is more of like kind of like a semi-fictional memoir about my life growing up, as a teenager and a Guyanese kid, in the suburbs. And even with that, even though it's grounded in a real world, you still have to remember like where things were, and what the real world looked like as well. So there is still an aspect of world building, whether your story is set in a real setting or whether it's something you just made up. But for me, I think that's the toughest part.
Okay. What
That
about
makes
you,
a
Janice?
lot of sense. The worlds that I'm building are so different from that. In a sense, mine could be set anywhere. It's not really, to me, that's the easy part. It's like, oh, this one I feel like I want to set, here or there. Now, I know for my first book, I had planned to write about a different pediatric disorder than what I did write about. Just because as I researched it, I discovered that, oh, there's newborn screening for this disorder. They would have caught this in the baby before that. Shoot, got to rewrite it, right? Rewrote it and then said, oh, shoot, there's another problem with this, right? And so I had to change the timing a little bit of it. Excuse me, just set it back 10 years or so to make it a little bit more realistic. And I changed the state that it was in just based on, well, who did newborn screening for this disorder during that period of time,
Yeah.
to try to be authentic. But that, I think, is pretty simple. That just took, a tiny bit amount of creativity, nothing like what you're describing. So for me, that wasn't really the issue. It's more about the characters' responses to what they're going through required a lot of thought and um, insight, I guess. How would I feel if I were going through that? How might I react? And if I might react this way, that way, or the third way, well, then maybe I need three characters to address that from different perspectives, because there's just so much going on here that's so emotional. My stories are so different from yours that I could see where we would approach these things just wildly differently. And there's no one that's better or worse. They're just, really super different,
Right.
maybe appeal to different audiences, maybe not.
I think it's just a different process.
Uh,
Yeah.
I feel like I'm so out of place when it comes to you two guys. I mean, you guys are incredible, man. Like,
We're all
so
just
ahead of
coming
the
from different
curve here.
backgrounds. That's all.
I'm gonna get there. I'm gonna get there.
You'll get
I know
there.
with me, I think the most difficult thing now that I'm getting into like writing short stories is the whole part of dialogue. So that's the hardest part for me. I'm coming from the world of poetry, so there's pretty much zilp dialogue with that. So that's all me just expressing my feelings, my thoughts on different things that are relevant to me, or maybe I'm just picking a topic out of the hat and then I'm kind of elaborating on it. So now that I'm getting short stories, again, I don't want the story to be dull, especially being that it's short. It's going to be real quick if I don't really make this interesting for somebody to tune off. So the dialogue part, it's a little bit hard for me. I don't have really too much trouble trying to create that emotional depth or just the world building aspects. I know exactly what I want my characters to be in the story and what their purpose is and how they're going to be interacting with other characters in the environment. But it's just the dialogue is getting me a little bit, just so that I can make it interesting. But most importantly, to make it make sense as they're interacting with other characters. You know, I caught myself a couple times. It was kind of like, um, how you have a conversation with somebody and you're supposed to be talking about this, and then next thing you know, it done diverted to something else. You're talking about something over here, and you're looking like, man, I'm really making myself look like a fool here. Like what happened here? Like, and the other person's looking at you like, what are you talking about, man? We're supposed to be discussing this, and you're way off left field over here. So that's kind of like where I'm at with my dialogue, with my book. I feel like I've gotten better. Hopefully when people read it, they don't crucify me too much about it. They'll be like, okay, well, it was at least coherent. I don't know if it was entertaining. You know what I mean? But that would be my difficult. Obviously, if I write more, I'm going to be writing my first novel. I kind of already started it. That's going to be really saturated with dialogue. So hopefully, the more I practice, the more I get better
One
at it.
thing One thing that Zeus really helped me before I even started thinking about starting novels was in college, like in my creative writing classes. Some of our assignments tend to be right like a one act play or a short play, and that honestly honed in my dialogue like I couldn't believe, because a lot of times I was basing those plays on things that I'd been through or past experiences anyway, and the focus was always especially since it's all dialogue, you have to focus on how people talk in real life. And like Janice, you were mentioning earlier, people talk in different ways, and whether it's they speak in short sentences or elaborate, it definitely makes you focus on that a lot more. And even teaching creative writing, that's something like that I run my kids through as well, is write a story with just dialogue, no description, no exposition, whatever. So you really
Wow.
have to put a lot of focus on how are those emotions coming through in how they're speaking, how like can you visualize like what they're doing or their mannerisms based on the way they're talking. And I found that went a long way with helping me get my dialogue across in writing a novel too. So just something to
I
keep in
love
mind.
that. But you do have to be careful too that your dialogue is really compelling, and that might sound so obvious, but I'm thinking my sister taught high school theater classes for many, many years, and she's told me about this exercise that she would do with her students. She would give them a scene and go up on stage and just basically act this out. And she said there would be times that they would start with, "Hey, hey, how
Yeah.
was your day?" Good. Oh my God. Like start you can come into the scene and start it with, "What the hell are you talking about?"
Yeah.
Right? And your audience doesn't know what's going on. They will, but they're not interested in the dreck of hello, hello, what are you doing? Right? So I think when we write things, we have to be really careful to get to the meat of it right away. Like how fun is it when you open the first page of a book and it starts with, "Well, that's not what I asked you to do." And you're like, well, who's talking and to whom and why? But you want to keep reading to find out, right?
Hmm.
So I try to keep that in mind, that get to the good stuff and leave out all the boring stuff.
Definitely.
Hmm.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot to cut out that people have, like a normal phone conversation. There are definitely things that you wouldn't include. Like, yeah,
Well,
hey, how's
Hmm.
it going?
exactly. There's that, what have you been doing since last week? I went grocery shopping. No one cares.
Nope.
I know, just real quick, I know an exercise that's been pretty helpful, pretty much coincide with what you guys were saying, is a good friend of mine is she's an author as well. And she created this exercise where she would come up with a scenario, something that is relatable to me. And then she was like, okay, if this situation presented yourself, how would you respond to it? Like, do that to me right now. How would you respond? Like, she will come up with scenarios that will involve my kids, for example. Okay, you know who you are. How would you respond to that if your kid presented this to you? They got in trouble, did something way out of their character, they knew it was wrong, but they did it anyway. How are you going to respond to that? I went at 0 to 100. You know what I mean? Because especially when it comes to kids, I know exactly what to say. It's a lot of choice words, a lot of theatricalness, basically on my part. And the more we did like these different exercises, and then each scenario that she presented, she added a little bit more complexity to it. So now I got a lot more comfortable with like dialogue because I instantly knew, me personally, how I would deal with that situation. So now when I try to translate that to my stories, my short stories, and how I want to develop the characters, it became a lot more easier because some of the scenarios she presented were kind of similar to what the character is going on within the short story. So that was a great tool for me.
That's the
um
nature of improv, right?
Yeah.
yeah. So for your viewers out there that are aspiring to become a writer and get things going with your book, you know, find some different type of techniques, some different type of exercises that can work for you to kind of develop your writing style and give you a better understanding of how you want to go about your process. At the end of the day, you got to find your own niche. We provided so much today, different types of tips, different type of techniques that you can use. Hopefully, it was very helpful. I hope we inspired you, because that was the main goal here. With Khalid and with Janice, two incredible authors. Thank you so much for being on the show. We're going to end it with we couldn't end it without stating this. What are you guys next? What are your next moves? Like, what's going on in the horizon for both of you? We'll start with Khalid.
Okay, so as you know, this is a series that I'm working on. Book 3 is due out in September, which means I have to finish it in July. So
Well, they ain't coming quick enough. But at least we got to at least we got a due date.
My whole life for the next 2 months is just write, just to get this book done. And we were talking about shows and whether they make sense, and I've been just applying to as many conventions and things as possible, especially with book 3 due out in September, because the fall seems to be the heaviest time of year when it comes to the events. So I'm hoping was it New York Comic Con is a go for me this year. I had the pleasure of doing it 2 years ago in like the writer's block area, which is like connected to like their artist section downstairs, and it was kind of the experience of a lifetime, just being there for 4 days and meeting like all kinds of fans, because with the traditional book events that we do, a lot of times it comes down to how we pitch ourselves, and people being like being able to sell our story to people that come up. And I found that like being at an event like Comic-Con, people want to spend their money. They're looking to buy something as long as, they have formed some type of connection. It was so much easier to sell my book there than at pretty much any other venue. So I'm hoping I can get back there in October, and that's pretty much what's on the horizon for me.
Awesome. Can't wait for the new book to come out.
Thank
It
you.
ain't coming quick enough. Janice, what we got going on?
Yeah. So I retired last week.
Congratulations.
Oh
So
my
thank
goodness,
you.
man. The
So
jealousy continues. Okay.
so
Just had to rub it in there,
yeah,
Janice.
no,
It's okay.
I
It's okay.
mentioned that at the very end.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I only mention it because I now will have, I hope, a lot more time for writing. It's important to me. So, book number 3 is titled What Never Was Mine, and it's on the topic of hereditary psychiatric illness. So, it's based around a family who had kind of one central trauma that has expressed itself in many different ways, with the idea being that what's hereditary about mental illness is a susceptibility to it, not a particular thing. So you don't inherit schizophrenia, but you can inherit a tendency toward or a higher risk for psychiatric illness, and whether it ever manifests and how depends upon a lot of other things that happen in your life. So this is a family with different responses to one central trauma and how they relate to each other and what they go through. And the idea being, I would like to portray to anybody who happens to pick the book up that one, psychiatric illness is extremely common, that there isn't a person on the planet who is not susceptible, and that this shouldn't be so stigmatized. That we all have family members, we all, many of us ourselves have issues that we deal with, and it's okay. And there are ways to do that. And, we shouldn't be so scared of it, right? And marginalize people with it. So that's kind of the goal, but it is, again, a family story. It's not, if you don't really want to learn all of those things from it, you don't have to. It's still just a story.
Awesome. And we got a due date? Not a due date yet?
Well, the beauty of self-publishing is you do it when you're ready.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
On my email signature, it says coming 2025, but I hope so. I do hope so. The cover art is already done and gorgeous. Like I said, I have a friend who's a graphic designer who I tell her that I'm proud to have my work on the same bookshelf with hers, because it's, she's awesome. Anyway, we'll see. I hope to have it out by the end of 25, but I make no promises.
Well, hopefully it does.
Yeah.
But in any event, we're definitely looking forward to whenever the book does come out. And when you guys' books do come out, we definitely got to get you back on the show so we can talk about your books.
Yeah, I'd love
pitch that to people and see the brilliance and magnificence of both of you. So definitely
Right back
much
at you.
blessings to both of you. I wish all the blessings, all the rewards in the world for both of you to keep on putting out the books. You definitely have a fan over here. And yeah, I just wish you guys the best. Definitely.
Thank you so much. Right back at you.
Yeah.
Khaled, such a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, you as well. This was a
Definitely,
great
definitely.
conversation.
Thanks. Yeah, this was fun. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Definitely. So for you viewers out there, I hope you had a notebook nearby, you took in a lot of mental notes, you wrote it down or mental, however you go about it. They offer so much a plethora of information that you can utilize. And for you guys out there that are aspiring to be a writer, just keep on pushing. You'll find your way in one way, shape, or form. Again, you know who it is. It's Zeus Cruz of Olympian Multimedia, presenting you with another episode of Views from the Literary Verse. And I guess the only thing left to say is thanks for tuning in, and we'll check you next time. Bye bye.